Alright, ल नमस्ते सबैजनालाई धन्यवाद मार्टिन चौतारी हामीले यो स्पेस दिनुभएको कुरा सो म 15 मिनटसम्म नबोल्ने प्रयास गर्छु ताकि हाम्रो छलफल अलि मजाले होस् हैन हामीले बोल्ने त छँदैछ So what I'm going to do is I'm going to situate today's discussion by briefly linking with my own education background so that हामी यहाँ सबै टिचरहरु पढिसक्नु जस्तो लाग्छ and perhaps researchers in some sense so maybe that way I can connect with you all. So म चाहिँ मेरो घर ताप्लेजुङ हो म गाउँ मेरो गाउँ लिङतेप भन्छ so मेरो शिशु क्लासदेखि 10 क्लाससम्म चाहिँ गाउँमा पढेर आएको So जो गाउँको अनुभव छ तपाईले त्यो के हो मैले भन्नु खोजेको सायद तपाईलाई you can feel about it right so it's all about धुले स्कुल हैन टिचर र स्टुडेन्टको रिलेसनशिप के हुन्छ भन्ने कुरा हामी इमेजिन गर्न सक्छौं एसेन्शियली मेरो क्लास 1 देखि 10 सम्मको अनुभव चाहिँ गोदाइ खाने कान छाल्ने कपाल उठाल्ने हैन यहाँदेखि यहाँसम्म लट्ठी खाने त्यसरी सिकेर आएको राइट that's how I finished my SLC तर त्यही पनि I didn't finish my 1 to 5 after I finished my 1 to 5 grade म चाहिँ अर्को स्कुलमा दुईटा स्कुलमा पढेको किनभने मेरो गाउँमा स्कुल थिएन So that also gave me a different opportunity to understand the idea of education, teachers and students engagement and so on and so forth. Kathmandu आए रत्नराजा अक्समी क्याम्पस पढे I think अहिले चाहिँ अब तपाईहरुलाई थाहा छ आरआर एक्जिस्ट कसैले थाहा नहुनु सक्छ रत्नराजा क्याम्पस लक्ष्मी क्याम्पस भन्छ त्यहाँ पढेको आए अनि त्रिचन्द्रमा बीए पढे मास्टर्स गर्न चाहिँ टियु गए So त्यसको अनुभव के भयो भने those classrooms were crowded with students right a very little space to actually go and sit down and have a class properly let alone the interaction with teachers and students right so that was non-existent essentially unless you made an effort to go early morning right morning class thank you a TU ko पनि त्यसै दुर्दशा थियो then I went back and more को अनि कोका युनिभर्सिटी गएर मास्टर्स सकाएर गए अनि म UK मा पढ्न गए so 1 year master's degree everybody knows that was very intense तर त्यसले मलाई के गर्यो भने मलाई घाइते बनायो म because I know I really suddenly realized that I have zero creative imagination I don't know how to think तर फर्केर आए अनि काम गरे then I really felt the need that what I know is the education that I have received is very incomplete of course learning is never complete right अमेरिका गएर PhD गर्नु बसे त्यहाँ अर्को रिभिल भयो it was painful I was forced to think I was forced to write I was forced to be imaginative and creative right the reason I'm saying all of these things is to really situate today's conversation about at the Open Institute how do we conceptualize the idea of knowledge production this is not a conclusive statement. This is to invite you to have conversation about how do we create knowledge. But at the Open Institute, we kind of like to take risk and fail rather than take a safe approach, especially in terms of teaching and learning. And because I think my colleagues would have similar examples in terms of my colleagues would probably say later on they also have diverse experience in terms of their learning experiences. Nepal, Singapore, in the US, in Canada, and so on and so forth. So at the Open Institute, the way we think about knowledge production is through these two categories. But फेरि यो चाहिँ यति नै black and white मा नसोच्दिनु होला. This is to simply as an exercise to think, not a conclusive statement. How do we produce knowledge then? So there are two ways we think about knowledge production. One is from power, personality, identity, and authority. The one is through hard labor and reflexivity. So you के हो भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ I think series मेरो साथीले पनि लिंक गर्दै जानुहुन्छ अनि मुनाजीले पनि लिंक गर्दै जानुहुन्छ पिटर जी र मुनाजीले लिंक गर्दै जानुहुन्छ So in these two forms of knowledge production on the other hand power, positionality, authority but only knowledge saying what we contest is about, this is much more about what is knowledge. The question is, what is it? भनेर चाहिँ अर्काबाट आउने, right? So a lot of questions about what do you need to know. These are you need to know this, right? With authority and positionality. This is what it is. You gotta know this. And it has all its importance. यसको महत्त्व छ. हामीले यसको महत्त्व छैन भनेको छैन है. The other would think about what we kind of engage is hard labor in the sense of reflexivity, in the sense that it is about asking questions how, why things happen the way they happen, right? Start thinking, be imaginative, take risk. Because research is a creative enterprise, not in a fictitious sense, but in a very observable sense, where you can make arguments in a very tangible sense. When we say creative enterprise, it doesn't mean that you kind of create something out of blue. You create something with an intense observation. Right? So that's what we mean by it. So what you can the only thing I wanted to situate that is to have this conversation about knowledge production, right? And so power and authority comes, knowledge, the kind of knowledge we see is also out of fear. Right? You right? It is very transactional in some ways, right? And that forces us to do some different kind of engagement in our learning processes. So that's what I want to situate. Sorry, nobody's timing me. I forgot to time myself. Okay, so how do we unpack the idea of hard labor and flexibility in the sense of knowledge production at the Open Institute? We kind of look at through, these are again, this is a, in some ways this is a provocation to all of us to, again, as I was saying, inviting you to have this conversation. These are not conclusive statements. These we learn through hard labor. Every day, every single time we encounter with students, what's working, what is not working, where things are, why things are the way things are, why some do really well, why some really struggle, right? With these kind of every classroom conversations, we spend in our faculty meeting talking about learning, talking about students. We don't talk about any others. 2 hours for faculty meeting, we spend 45 minutes, an hour and 45 minutes just talking about student and teachers engagement. What happened in your class? What happened in my class? All of these kind of conversations. These kind of every week conversation led us to have this, a bit of risk, take a risk. So what do we mean by hard labor and reflexivity when I give an example? हाम्रो बिलिभमा के छ भने when we say this is how we're unpacking it, the way we look at it is every student have a capacity, an agency to become writers and researchers regardless of where they come from. महिला होस्, पुरुष होस्, दलित होस्, के भन्छ हामी ब्याकवर्ड भन्ने शब्द युज गर्छौँ हैन, जहाँबाट होस्, we believe that every individual has capacity to become researchers and writers. That means our fundamental approach is to nurture that agency in the sense that each and every one of you have that ability, that power. You have sense of values. You have a belief system that really matters. That's what we want. We constantly try to nurture that quality of every student. What do I mean? What do we mean by then individual autonomy? Individual autonomy in the sense that each of us have the ability to really observe authentically, right? The authenticity, the way you look at things, right? And then more importantly, it's also about then how do you reflect back effectively to have a conversation in the sense of other writers keep you participate in that conversation with that that autonomy, right? And that's what we mean by when we talk about agency and individual autonomy. हाम्रो लगभग 4 वर्ष प्लस भइसक्यो अहिले. This August would be 9th intake. And when I say this, our pedagogical approach to teaching and learning, I'm not trying to paint a really rosy picture here. Everything is fascinating. We use this pedagogical approach and then everything is so well. That's not the point. The point here, as Ruxi was laying the ground in terms of what the purpose of this is to reflect our experience in teaching in social science. And so that's the pedagogy. But some do really well, and my colleague will dig deeper into that to reflect how does it look like. But at least up until now, what I would like to focus then is, in addition to this agency and autonomy, there's something we constantly observe. That is about hierarchy. There's a hierarchy, a constant hierarchy, right? There's another sense of structure, social structural conditioning. Hierarchy in the sense that, look, teacher and students have a hierarchy, there's no doubt. But what is this hierarchy? मैले अघि सुरुमा भने नि, मैले बुझाइ मात्रै खाएँ के स्कुल पढ्दाखेरि, राइट? युनिभर्सिटी जाँदाखेरि पनि 3 घण्टा जाँच लेखेपछि हामी सबैले थाहा छ त्यसको नतिजाले हामी को के हौं भन्ने कुरा नि थाहा हुने, right? But that was always, I work with fear, not with being imaginatively creative. US मा गएपछि मलाई पुरै I kind of fall apart, right? Beginning from England. So I fall apart. But I try to put up together and see how does it look like then now. Right? This kind of hierarchy it's not teacher student. The hierarchy you see in the States between teachers and students, as all of us know, that has its own implication and importance. I'm not saying that that's the best way. No, actually that's not. I have mixed feelings about the extreme hierarchy between teachers and students. अब यहाँको त किन यहाँको त पुरै नभयो हैन सरलाई लेख्यो भने कति बेला तपाईको रेस्पोन्स उहाँको रेस्पोन्स नके पनि थाहा हुँदैन, right? Not everyone. I'm not saying everyone is not so engaging. But that hierarchy that we have seen and experienced and lived, right? That structure in which we engage in teaching and learning is very consequential. यो किन हामीले consequential भन्दैछौँ भने विद्यार्थी के गर्छन् भन्दाखेरि मैले पढ्नु पाइनँ भन्छन् क्या, अरु काम थियो मैले पढ्नु पाइनँ भन्छन्. But in our observation, that is something to do with very structural condition that we see in our society. Private enterprise मा हेरौँ न, तपाईलाई हाकिमले जति बेला भन्छ अनि मात्रै काम गरिन्छ नि त, इन्स्ट्रक्सन वेट गरिन्छ. घरमा सबैमा भन्दिन, घरमा पनि हामीलाई ठुलोले के अराउँछ अनि त्यसपछि गर्ने, right? And so in our experience, this kind of hierarchy does is students wait for teachers to tell them what to do, and we're not doing that. Now, consequence, some students kind of don't do what we hope that they are capable of doing. This also leads to a sense of ownership. They still wait for you from the teachers that as opposed to, I've got this question, what's we do about it? Doing engagement सबैमा देखिँदैन. And so over the course of 4.5 years, what we sort of like experienced is, I don't know, this is getting a little technical, but there's a book by Stephanie Fu भन्ने एकजनाको book. I was recently reading, I was sharing with my colleague the other day. what and why my bones know whenever he books. Okay, and she talks about she's a journalist, but she in her work suddenly she can't work. She's always anxious. She's always fearful.
15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Ani, त्यो गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ she does this amazing research and writes this book and talks about complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm not talking about like, oh my God, everyone is traumatized and oh, we have PTSD. I'm not saying that. But what we are saying is there is some kind of anxiety going on here among students about learning anxiety. That learning anxiety. कसैले भाषाको समस्या छ, कसैले स्कुल ब्याकग्राउन्डको समस्या छ, म कुन स्कुलबाट आएको, बोर्डिङ स्कुलबाट आएँ कि म रातो बङ्गलाबाट आएँ कि म चाहिँ सरस्वती मावि जनता माविबाट आएँ कि म सूर्योदयबाट आएँ कि म मुनसाइनबाट आएँ कि कहाँबाट आएँ. There's very self-conscious about that. And so that sort of like it creates some kind of learning anxiety. And our constant challenge is to really grapple with that. How do we work with students who have that level of learning anxiety, which somehow discourages them to engage the way we want them to engage. Okay? So that's sort of like a we see in despite this take risk and fail rather than try to do a very traditional way of teaching and learning. Our experience suggests that level of some students do really well, some students struggle so hard. And why is that? So that's what we are kind of at the juncture of really, we identified, I think, in our experience, we identified something. We can now name it. Now our goal then is to constantly work towards that. All right, thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you during our discussion. Okay.
All right. हुन्छ अब म खास हुन्छ म खास अलिक बढी इङ्ग्लिस बोल्छु किनभने अझै लामो कुराले आगेबाट अलिकति गाह्रो छ तर हाम्रो छलफल भाषा हाम्रो छलफलको लागि So as my colleague Dhirendra was saying, one of the big surprises I think we really had when starting to teach social science in Nepal, this going back 4 or 5 years now, was how much of what we encountered was really about psychosocial dynamics that led to students feeling incapable, feeling like their voice had nothing to contribute, feeling like they didn't have a story to tell. And a surprising amount of our work, much more than I think we thought it would be, was about helping people to unpack that, to kind of dive into that process, to go into. And that's something that I think has been really a piece that we still struggle with tremendously. How do we give people not only the skills, but also the confidence, the ability to take the work they're doing, to take the things they're seeing and say, you know what, this matters. This has importance. This is a part of the story that people really need to hear. This part of the narrative isn't what's being said right. People aren't seeing this. They're not recognized. And that matters too. So a lot of the work we've been doing over the past few years is really kind of exploring that space of saying, what does effective empowerment look like? And how does social science serve? When our program started 4 years ago, honestly, it resembled much more strongly a pretty traditional one-year master's program. We had a course on methodology, we had a course on theory, we had a course on proposal writing. All the kind of standard courses were really structured in that space. And we taught the course in a very traditional way too. We said, okay, the first step of any good research project is to identify your research question. Find your research question. And time again, we found students just got absolutely stuck. This was a space where they would kind of find themselves in a bit of a quagmire. They would just say, they'd kind of come up with questions, they'd come up with things, but none of those questions really, overwhelming majority of the time, those questions weren't authentic questions. They weren't questions that were coming from the basis of their experience. And the work that came from that was often very superficial, very shallow, very kind of engaging in kind of topics that maybe resonated with what they thought would advance their career, maybe resonated with kind of thematics that are popular in kind of development and INGO work here, but didn't actually constitute the kind of deep dives into knowledge creation that we really need to facilitate. And what was happening, what we saw was that sort of students were focused on this end product. They wanted a kind of thesis that says, our orientations are towards the production of this document, of this kind of single sort of representation that we can put forward. And time again, we found that way of looking really wasn't working. It was really challenging to kind of get students to move forward, and we struggled. So we went back and we kind of actually talked to a lot of our friends, we talked to people we were in grad school with, we talked to colleagues of various sorts, and what we found was that this thing that's taught in just about every research methodology book, that's taught, certainly that I've taught in many times, in many different university spaces, this idea of starting with a research question is actually kind of a lie. It's not actually how researchers begin the process of engaging in meaningful knowledge production, of engaging in those kinds of spaces. And it was this kind of far-off process where they'd see the product that they needed to end up at, but had very little understanding and very little kind of internalization of the processes that would ultimately lead them. And a lot of this, as we kind of explored and as we experimented with different teaching methodologies and different ways of engaging students, I think ultimately had to do with an attempt to turn what is really a circular process into a linear. To say, this is just kind of the scientific method. This is a very familiar model. Any kind of quantitative data, hypothesis testing is going to do this very explicitly, but even the kind of work that I'm particularly interested in, ethnography and things like that, are going to engage in this kind of constant cycle. And so the question we found ourselves asking is, how do we actually support students to enter not just into a process that's going to lead into a document, but rather an ongoing cycle? And very tangibly, what that looked like for us was a kind of restructuring of our program, away from a focus on a final output, and away from a focus on this is what a thesis looks like, and a focus on the kind of final document that we will produce from this. We turned our focus onto 3 daily habits. And our program, as we run it today, continues to evolve every semester. We still struggle. This is something that we still really, each semester changes in this way. But we found really tremendous results in helping students to cultivate, as we said, 3 daily habits, 3 things that social science requires you to do every single day. And building those habits into your kind of daily process becomes the step towards productive engagement and authentic knowledge production. So 3 daily habits and 6 kinds of writing. And everything we do in this program, all of our teaching, is all about kind of fostering the skills to kind of step into these processes. They're not easy. I don't mean to, this is not some clickbait, 6 steps to a thesis kind of thing. That's really not the intention here. But we do want to help students transform their own way of thinking about themselves and the work that they do as not something that's isolated to a project, but rather part of a way of engaging with work. So we're going to talk about kind of what these are specifically, but this is really the skills that we hope our students come out with in this course. They're radical listening, reflexive naming, and collaborative debate. These are the 3 things that, even outside of an orientation towards a specific document project, these are the 3 things that social scientists are engaged in constantly, and they take a very specific shape. By radical listening, we mean something very concrete. We mean that social science requires us to be immersed in the world. It requires us to be engaged in the world, to be constantly pushing ourselves up against the discovered facts of the world. Now, that can be an ethnographic field site, that can be a historical archive, that can be a quantitative data set. It can be any number of different spaces where we take what we think we know, what we think we already believe, and push that against the realities of the world, against things that maybe are unexpected. So we ask students to observe what they encounter and to let themselves be challenged by it, to really kind of take in whatever they're seeing and to reflect on why they're seeing the things they're seeing, where that's coming from, what that looks like. The second piece here, and this is overall the thing that I think gives a lot of our students and both at OI and prior to coming to OI a lot of anxiety and just sense of bewilderment was the idea of theory. And what is theory? And what is theory for? And why do we need theory? And how do we constitute theory? And of course, the project. So we identify this as a process of reflexive naming, of being able to look at one's own work and say, what are these things that I'm identifying here called? How should we identify them? What should we say is actually taking place? And then actually stepping back and interrogating the various names we use. So a very concrete example here. This is an example from just a couple weeks ago with our current running semester. A student came back from a field exercise talking to somebody, and she was interviewing a friend of hers who had been sexually harassed on a bus. She came back to the classroom and we were sharing this, we were talking, we were kind of going through these field notes, the radical listening that she was doing out in the field. She was bringing that back, we were talking about it, reflecting it here. And at one moment she said, this was a quote from her piece, she said, and then she was talking to her husband, and her husband victim blamed her. So her husband victim blamed her for being sexually harassed. Now, I think that's something we all have this intuitive sense of what that means. We know what that idea is. And my first instinct, my first reaction as a social scientist trying to teach social science was to say, okay, let's be specific here. Let's show what that means. Kind of show, don't tell is something that I think a lot of writing coaches and social science instructors are kind of saying over and over again. And of course, we unpack that. What does victim blaming look like in this case? Well, it looks like rather than putting the blame on the individual who was sexually harassing her, we're putting the blame onto her by saying, well, why were you riding the bus? Why were you nice to him? Did you say something nice to him? And I think that move, that first move of saying, let's talk about what this actually is. What are the actual actions? What are the actual observable realities that constitute this thing we're calling victim blaming is a familiar move in the social sciences. At the same time, that act of naming itself, of saying this is victim blaming. This is not just one husband being a jerk to his wife. This is part of something much bigger. This is a social fact. This is a part of a larger social reality. Is what that name does. We're not just describing kind of tangible, observable facts, but we're saying that this set of tangible, observable facts is related to a much larger social process. So this is what this is. When we ask students to name, we're helping them to kind of develop a process of theory building, of saying, here's where I see the large structures of the world within these single interactions, within these single textual documents, within this one bit of data. But then simultaneously to take that back and to be able to say, but hold on, we need to interrogate these terms. When we say things like diversity, when we say things like victim, when we say things of this nature, these theoretical constructs, what is the actual lived realities? What is the substance that gives this?
10-minute backyard.
10-minute backyard. What they have. The final one we ask students to do, the kind of third leg of this mura is collaborative debate. We ask students to engage and say, here are what are other people saying in your space? What are other people talking about? And how does what you're seeing and how does what you're understanding fit into that process? Now, in an academic context, people are kind of writing for a master's program. This is literature. This is engaging in the literature that exists. But to facilitate other forms of writing as well, this may not necessarily take the form of kind of technical documents. Now, this is the most important step. From there, we're asking students to engage in a process of writing, not at the end of the course, but from day one. Every single step of the way is writing and writing and writing, and that's really been, I think, the key habit that we've struggled, but I think often helped our students to instill is this process of writing every single day. You don't have to be done with your project to start writing. You write from the absolute beginning, from day one. Now we asked them to write 6 different kinds of text. The first 3 are simple summary notes. These are, as factually as possible, accounts of what has taken place. These are field notes. These are kind of almost mechanical brain dumps of saying, these are the things I saw. We ask students to kind of reflect on what's conditioning what they see, but at the end of the day, anything and everything goes here. There's no attempt at synthesis. It's really meant to be a very raw form of writing where they take the sorts of observations they make and translate them into a written space. The second type of writing we do is what we call a concept map, and that's really kind of taking these names, these categories, and saying, where are we seeing them? Can we map out all the different locations? If we're seeing homophobia, what does that look like? Where are the different field observations or the different archival observations that we have that allow us to locate these names in the real world? And finally, collaborative debate. We just ask them, we say, literally every single thing you read for this course, and ideally everything you read in your life, make a summary of it. Make a 1-paragraph summary saying, this is what this article said. It's Last, we asked them to write 3 more types of document. These are living documents, these are reflection memos. And we asked them to write field memos, theory memos, and literature memos. These are translations of the kind of raw data that they've encountered, the things they've been summarizing into narratives. To say, how do we translate this thing I saw into the field into a story? My colleague Una in just a second is going to be talking a lot more about that act of storytelling and where we see that fitting into the work we do. But it is that process of taking kind of observations and turning them into narrative. There's a lot that could be said here. There's a lot that is a lot of detail that we could get into. But what we've really enjoyed, what's been really exciting for me at least, is this is teaching social science has been a real challenge. It's something we kind of really struggled with. But what's been so lovely in this kind of reorienting the process around daily habits is that when it comes time for students then to sit down and actually write a thesis, and actually write a dissertation, or write a book, or write an article for whatever kind of genre, they're no longer looking at a blank page. They're looking at this vast assortment of writings that they already have. That blank page can be immensely intimidating, and it's something that I think kind of shuts down a lot of kind of authentic presentation. But by building this space of very low stakes, low risk writing to kind of write in a very kind of safe, comfortable, obvious way, suddenly when it comes time for students to take that next step and write a dissertation, write a thesis, write a capstone, they realize they have this vast array of writing that already exists. It becomes a process of synthesizing and pulling together. So the transformation of what we see ourselves as responsible for, and I don't think we do this perfectly all the time, it's still something that's very hard. But rather than talking about, here's where you're going, saying, this is what you have to do right now. This is what every day should look like for you as a social scientist, as somebody who has something to say. We're able to really kind of, I think, I've been so excited by the work that our students have done. They produce some dynamite capstone projects, theses, things like that. And when they don't, the problem is always very simple. It's that those daily habits haven't become daily habits. When we go back and look at the data we have about students who have succeeded and students who have kind of really thrived and students who have struggled, it's not breaking down by gender lines. It's not breaking down by socioeconomic lines. We have students from prestigious kind of well-known schools. We have students who have been underserved by their education their entire lives. And what makes the kind of writing what makes this method work is not any of those facts of background, but rather, so sorry, but rather just the willingness and the possibility of engaging in this way. Thanks. I will pass it over to Luna. All right. Luna, you are up. We're just going to turn off the fans just for. It is quite hot in Kathmandu.
Can you turn me around?
Yeah, sorry.
सुरु गरौँ
नमस्ते वृन्दलाई म मुना अब एकैछिन म सक्दो छोटो बोल्छु सो द्याट त्यति साह्रो गर्मी नबस्नु परेन तपाईँहरूलाई मेरो दुईजना कलिगहरूले भन्नुभएको जस्तै म चाहिँ ठ्याक्क पिटरले भन्नुभएको एभ्रिडे डेली ह्याबिट्सबाट पिकअप गर्छु मैले यो 4.5 वर्ष आफै एज एन एजुकेटर अनि राइटर पनि रिसर्च गर्नुपर्दा चाहिँ मैले के बुझेँ भने एकदमै क्लियरली महत्त्वपूर्ण चाहिँ के हुँदो रहेछ भने राइटिङलाई राम्रो बनाउनुको सट्टा भन्दा पनि साथसाथै writer, to be a better writer, how can we work on the writer and the writer's relationship with their writing? त्यो चाहिँ एकदमै महत्त्वपूर्ण देखियो. So usually हामी कसरी काम गर्छौँ स्कुलमा हुँदा पनि त्यसरी नै गर्थ्यौँ जस्तै कि एउटा पिस अफ राइटिङ छ यसलाई एकदम भव्य बनाउनु पर्यो अनि A+ पाओस् अनि कतै गएर छापियोस् हैन त्यस्तै हाम्रो आशा हुन्छ एकदम प्रोडक्ट सेन्टर्ड अनि instead of that to turn it into process centered and then also maybe focusing on their identity. मेरो कलिगहरूले बोल्नु हुँदा पनि तपाईले सुनिरहनु भएको होला हामी स्टुडेन्ट्सहरूलाई सोशल साइन्टिस्ट भन्छौँ उहाँहरूलाई राइटर्स भन्छौँ थिङ्कर्स रिडर्स भन्छौँ यो सबै एक प्रकारको आइडेन्टिटी हो जुन चाहिँ हामीले उहाँहरूलाई चाहिँ अप्नाउनु भनेर चाहिँ एकदमै पुश गर्छौँ म चाहिँ छोटकरीमा जस्ट प्रोसेस अफ राइटिङको बारेमा कुरा गर्न चाहन्छु त्यही यहाँ हामी आज सबै जनघरमा यहाँ जो आउनु भएको छ तपाईँहरू सबैलाई यो एकदमै राम्रो तरिकाले थाहा छ होला राइटिङ भनेको एउटा प्रोसेस हो हैन हाम्रो आफ्नै प्रोसेस हुन्छ तर दुःखको कुरा चाहिँ के हो भने हामी धेरैलाई चाहिँ के सिकाएको हुन्छ भने त्यो एउटा शब्द छ नि आँसु कवि भन्ने जुन चाहिँ नि एकदमै फुर्र फुल्छ एक दुई शब्द अनि पारेर सबै लेख्यो अनि पर्फेक्ट हुन्छ अनि दुनियाँमा निस्किन्छ अनि सबैलाई मन पराउँछ अनि सक्यो हैन अनि यदि रिभाइज गर्नु छ भने ठिक छ एक दुईवटा शब्द काट्ने काटकुट गर्ने कमा कतै थप्ने हैन अलिअलि गर्ने राम्रो बनाउने अनि सक्यो राइटिङ लेख्दा एसे लेख्दाखेरि पनि क्लासमा के सिकाइन्थ्यो 5वटा प्याराग्राफ हुन्छ एसेको इन्ट्रोडक्सन हुन्छ इन्ट्रोडक्सनमा आफ्नो इन्ट्रोडक्सन गर्ने के हो विषय अनि थिसिस भनिहाल्ने इन्ट्रोडक्सनमा अनि 3वटा बाँकीको बडी प्याराग्राफमा चाहिँ त्यो थिसिसलाई प्रुभ गर्ने 3वटा एभिडेन्स एक प्याराग्राफमा लेख्ने अनि लास्टमा गएर कन्क्लुजनमा चाहिँ त्यो इन्ट्रोडक्सनलाई चाहिँ अलिक भिन्नै तरिकाले तर सेम इन्ट्रोडक्सनलाई रिपिट गर्ने हैन यो एउटा फर्मुलेट कुरा हामीले सिकिरहेको पनि हो अनि मेरो अनुभवमा चाहिँ मैले के बुझेँ भने यो 4 वर्षमा चाहिँ हाम्रो राइटर्सहरू हाम्रो सोशल साइन्टिस्टहरूलाई चाहिँ क्लासरुममा मैले उहाँहरूसँग इन्गेज गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ धेरै अनलर्निङ गर्नु परेको छ उहाँहरूको साथसाथै म आफैले पनि सो यो 5 प्याराग्राफलाई छोडेर चाहिँ कसरी राइटिङलाई एउटा प्रडक्ट होइन कि एउटा प्रोसेसको रूपमा सोच्ने भन्ने चाहिँ हाम्रो धेरै प्रयास छ टिचरले पनि अघि भन्नुभयो एभ्रिडे लेख्ने राइट सो you're not writing as a product but you're writing to in John Didion's words to find out entirely what you're thinking about. You're writing to explore what you don't know. You're writing to ask questions. You're writing to understand something. Maybe you didn't understand something through lekhदाखेरि 2 पेजपछि you have a little bit clearer understanding of something, right? So using writing as a tool rather than a product has been sort of my focus in both the classes I teach in over 2 semesters. In the first semester, I teach contemporary essay writing, where we write 3 different kinds of writing essays in multiple drafts. अनि सेकेन्ड सेमेस्टरमा चाहिँ हाम्रो वर्कसप हुन्छ म त्यसको बारेमा एकछिनमा कुरा गर्छु सो यो राइटिङ चाहिँ कसरी राइटिङ चाहिँ टुलको तरिकाले लिने अनि राइटर चाहिँ आफ्नै राइटिङद्वारा चाहिँ कसरी आफ्नो राइटरली आइडेन्टिटीसँग चाहिँ बढी जोडिने अनि आफ्नो वाट इज युर रिलेसनसिप टु यर राइटिङ त्यसलाई बढी तगडा बनाउने यु नो द्याट इज द फोकस द्याट हेज बिन द फोकस सो म थोरै यो वर्कसपको कुरा गर्छु यो शब्द वर्कसप भन्ने सायद लास्ट 5 इयर्समा एकदमै प्रचलित भएको छ जता पनि जे पनि वर्कसप भनिन्छ होइन अनि वर्कसप भनेको कस्तो मिठो शब्द पनि हो सबैसँग आएर काम गर्ने एकदम इग्यालिटेरियन डेमोक्रेटिक रूपमा होइन एकअर्काको कुरा सुन्ने तर यो वर्कसप भनेको यसले हामीले चाहिँ कसरी गर्छौँ भने ओआईमा चाहिँ 1 वर्षभरि चाहिँ उहाँहरूको रिसर्चमा चाहिँ धेरै बितिसकेको हुनुहुन्छ अनि फिल्ड मेमोजहरू पनि धेरै बनाइसकेको हुनुहुन्छ अनि उहाँहरूले चाहिँ अब चाहिँ अलिक यसलाई चाहिँ पब्लिक फेसिङ एउटा टेक्स्ट कसरी निर्माण गर्ने कसरी लेख्ने भन्नेतिर लाग्नुहुन्छ उहाँहरू होइन अघि टिचरले स्टोरी टेलिङको कुरा गर्नुभयो स्टोरी टेलिङ पनि अर्को एकदमै राम्रो शब्द हो कम्पाउन्ड वर्ड हो होइन वर्कसप पनि स्टोरी टेलिङ पनि त्यसमा स्टोरी टेलिङमा चाहिँ टेलरको टेलिङ एकजनाले भनिरहेको छ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ प्रष्ट हुन्छ तर कसले चाहिँ सुनिरहेको छ भन्ने चाहिँ हामीले अलिक नसोच्दो रहेछ कहिलेकाहीँ होइन अब स्कुलतिर चाहिँ हाम्रो अडियन्सको हुनुहुन्छ त हाम्रो टिचर किनभने उहाँलाई पढाएर उहाँले हामीलाई कपी मार्क गर्नुहुन्थ्यो अनि हामीलाई ग्रेड दिनुहुन्थ्यो होइन त्यसबाहेक अडियन्स हाम्रो को हो त भन्ने चाहिँ धेरै कम सोच्दो रहेछ अनि मोस्टली नोभिस रिसर्चरहरूले पनि त्यही देखाउँछ नोभिस राइटर्सहरू चाहिँ मोस्टली आफ्नो आइडियाजको बारेमा सोच्नुहुन्छ तर कसरी यो भनिरहेको छ यो आइडियाज कति टाढा कसलाई गइरहेको छ यसलाई कसरी प्याकेज गर्यो भने चाहिँ अलिकता क्लियर हुन्छ एक्सेसिबल हुन्छ म अलिकता बढी दानी कसरी बन्नु एज अ राइटर त्यो कुराहरू चाहिँ हामीले अलिक सोचेको होला तर क्लियरली चाहिँ त्यो अगाडि आइरहेको हुँदैन सो यो वर्कसपमा चाहिँ हाम्रो स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू चाहिँ एकअर्काको केसेस पढ्छौँ अनि हामी आफै राइटर्स एज एक्सपर्ट्स एन्ड रिडर्स एज एक्सपर्ट्स मैले हामीले वर्कसपमा फिडब्याक दिँदाखेरि चाहिँ म एउटा एकदमै खतरा प्रख्यात राइटर हो भनेर मेरो एकदमै धेरै पब्लिकेसन भएको छ भनेर दिनेको सट्टा अथवा मैले त देख्नै आउँदैन मैले कसरी फिडब्याक दिने भन्ने पनि धेरै स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू हुनुहुन्छ हामी चाहिँ राइटरको रूपले होइन कि एउटा रिडरको रूपले फिडब्याक दिने सो तपाईँले कसरी यो टेक्स्टलाई बुझ्नुभयो अथवा बुझ्नु भएन त्यो चाहिँ एकदम अनेस्टली अथेन्टिकली त्यो चाहिँ एक्सप्रेस गर्ने होइन आफ्नो केयरलाई अनि उहाँहरूले सुन्नुहुन्छ अनि यदि उहाँहरूले तपाईँको फिडब्याक लिनुहुन्छ अथवा लिनुहुँदैन सो यो अडियन्समा पनि अनि वर्कसपमा पनि हामीले के देख्यौँ भने अडियन्स त हुनुहुन्छ आफ्नै पेयर्स हो यो सिचुएसनमा तर अडियन्सले फिडब्याक पनि दिनुहुन्छ तर त्यो फिडब्याक कसरी लिने भन्ने पनि फेरि अर्को एउटा आर्ट हो सो टु टेक एन्ड रिसिभ फिडब्याक आर 2 डिफ्रेन्ट काइन्ड्स अफ आर्ट आई थिङ्क द्याट हामीले निरन्तर सिकिरहन्छौँ म अहिले पनि आफै पनि सिकिरहेको छु होइन किनभने फिडब्याक लिनु भनेको एकदम गाह्रो कुरा हुन्छ हामीलाई एकदम पर्सनल पनि कुरा हुन्छ किनभने राइटिङ यस्तो गाह्रो गरिरहेको हुन्छ होइन अनि त्यसमा छक्कले के भन्यो भने आफूलाई नै भनेको जस्तो लाग्छ होइन सो त्यसको लागि पनि धेरै प्रिपरेसनहरू अनि कसरी राइटिङलाई चाहिँ एकदमै सेक्रेड प्रेसस नबनाउने कुरा चाहिँ हामीले धेरै सुरुदेखि नै गरिरहेको हुन्छ यदि तपाईँले दिनदिनै निरन्तर लेख्नुभयो भने चाहिँ त्यो राइटिङ कम प्रेसस हुन जाँदो रहेछ यदि तपाईँले एक महिनामा 500 शब्द अथवा 200 शब्द लेख्नु भने त्यो त कति ठुलो एउटा मोती जस्तो भन्छ कि त्यसलाई त अब छुन काट्न रिभाइज गर्न त डरै लाग्छ अथवा अरूले केही भन्नुहोस् भने त्यो एकदमै प्रेसस हुन जान्छ है सो हामीले त्यो राइटिङलाई कसरी कम प्रेसस बनाउने होइन so that we can be flexible with it भन्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ एकदम प्र्याक्टिस गर्छौँ तर यो कुरा गाह्रो पनि हो as my colleagues were saying we are constantly changing our ways of sort of engaging with our students in order to best serve them and our community and each other so just as of next week or this week मैले आफ्नो स्टुडेन्ट्सहरूलाई पनि कुरा गरिरहेको थिएँ वर्कसप मोडल चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ भने कसैले आफ्नो पिस ल्याउनुहुन्छ अनि त्यो पिस चाहिँ सबैजना छलफल गर्छ अनि आफू चाहिँ 45 मिनट अथवा 1 घन्टा चाहिँ चुपचाप सबैको कुरा सुन्ने बिकज द ट्रेडिसनल मोडल अफ वर्कसप वाज this thing that the author is dead and therefore the text should speak for itself भन्ने कुरा हैन अनि त्यसलाई चाहिँ हामीले अलिकता मोडिफाई गरेर चाहिँ अथरले आफै लिड गर्नुहुन्छ कि कुन क्वेशन्स यो मेरो पिसमा चाहिँ मलाई कुनमा फोकस गर्नु छ भनेर उहाँले भन्नुहुन्छ अनि त्यही अनुसार चाहिँ वर्कसप चलिन्छ भनेर तर उहाँहरू चाहिँ चुप नै साइलेन्स नै बस्नुहुन्थ्यो अनि लास्टमा चाहिँ केही गर्नुहुन्छ अब अहिले नै मैले यो धेरैचोटि आफै हुन्छ नि प्र्याक्टिस पनि गर्छु मेरो to work with the students and एकदम reflection अब आजको टपिकले त्यो रिफ्लेक्ट पनि गर्नुपर्दा चाहिँ यो वर्कसपमा किन साइलेन्ट रहने त maybe we need to unsilence some of the writer so that they are more involved in their work and their journey as a writer and their relationship to the writing so त्यसलाई नै नेक्स्ट वीक म शिफ्ट गर्दैछु सो यस्तो कुराहरू एकदमै त्यो प्र्याक्टिस गरिरहेको कुराहरू आफैले पनि म आफै एज एजुकेटरले पनि मैले चाहिँ गरिरहेको है किन मैले त्यो गरिरहेको छु यसले कति सर्भ गरेको छ भनेर चाहिँ धेरै धेरै तहको रिफ्लेक्सन्सहरू गर्दै हाम्रो क्लासेसहरू पनि मेरो कलिगहरूले भन्नुभएको जस्तै मोडिफाइड हुँदै जान्छ So I've talked about accessibility, I've talked about feedback, receiving and taking feedback. अनि अर्को कुरा यो हामीले चाहिँ यो फिडब्याक दिँदाखेरि पनि हामीले एकदम प्रिस्क्रिप्टिभ नहुनु हाउ टु आस्क क्वेसन्स इन्स्टेड अफ डिमान्ड समथिङ जस्तै कि कसैले पढ्नुहुन्छ मैले तपाईँको पढेँ तर यो क्यारेक्टरले किन यो भन्यो सायद यो भनेको भए अलिक ठिक हुन्थ्यो कि भन्ने खालको एकदम हामीलाई सुझावहरू सजिलोसँग आउँछ नि त एकदम प्रिस्क्रिप्टिभ तर त्यो यो क्यारेक्टरले यस्तो भन्यो हुन्थ्यो भन्नुको सट्टा तपाईँको क्यारेक्टरले यस्तो भन्यो किन भन्नुभएको होला है तपाईँले यसरी किन लेख्नु भएको भनेर उल्टो राइटरलाई सोध्ने हाउ टु टर्न द्याट इन्टु अ मोर इन्क्वायरी बेस्ड मोर आइडियाज बेस्ड वर्कसप रादर देन डिमान्ड्स अन द राइटर यस्तो गऱ्यो भने ठिक हुन्छ है सो त्यस्तो कुराहरू चाहिँ हामीले एकदम अगेन इट्स एन ongoing process about revision, about giving and taking feedback, and then thinking about our audience at each time. Who are our audience? And the audience सोच्ने बित्तिकै especially as नेपाली हाम्रो धेरै स्टुडेन्ट्सहरू नेपाली हुन्छ तर अरू देशहरूबाट पनि जोडिनु भएको छ लास्ट 4 इयर्समा चाहिँ त्यसमा ट्रान्सलेसनको पनि कुरा आउँछ अडियन्स सोच्ने बित्तिकै होइन कति ट्रान्सलेट गर्ने कति धेरै कति कम कति एक्सप्लेन गर्ने कति देखाउने अझै हाम्रो टिचरले भन्नुभयो जस्तै show don't tell भन्दा पनि show and tell it's a balance of showing and telling भन्ने खालको प्र्याक्टिसेसहरू चाहिँ हामीले ट्राई गरिरहेको छौँ but in the end I think हाम्रो काम के हो त as a writer and as a storyteller यो कथा किन भनिरहेछु यो कथा मैले नै किन भन्नुपर्ने यो कथा मैले नै अहिले किन भन्नुपर्ने यो कसले सुन्नुपर्ने हो हैन यो सबै क्वेशन्सहरुको चाहिँ हामीले एकदम कन्स्टेन्टली आफूलाई इन्टरोगेट गरेर चाहिँ हाम्रो काम गर्छौँ अनि अन्तिममा चाहिँ आई थिंक हामी एज अ राइटर हाम्रो काम चाहिँ एकदम अनेस्टली लेख्ने एकदम अथेन्टिकली अनि एउटा एक्युरेटली लेख्ने जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई आई थिंक त्यति होला सायद क्वेसन्स छ भने आन्सर मैले धेरै कुरा छुटाइरहेको छु थ्याङ्क यू
हुन्छ पिटरजी धीरेन्द्रजी र मुनाजीलाई चाहिँ धन्यवाद अब हामी फ्लोर ओपन गर्छौँ तपाईँको जिज्ञासा प्रश्न उहाँहरूले प्रस्तुतिमा कुनै कमेन्ट छ भने दिन सक्नुभयो हात उठाएर गर्नुभयो भने त्यो सजिलो हुन्छ
I'm working with the Nepal campuses, Dewan University. Fortunately, unfortunately, I'm taking the class on legal research. So I will start with basic disclaimers in the sense, we started with the saying that knowledge production in the social science, but we as a lawyers, we as a legal researchers try to see law as separate under the social science. So we have our own methods, we have our own like teaching pedagogy, we have our own disciplines, we have our own things. So we do not try to narrate the same story that's there, exporting law from the social sciences. Dhirendra rightly started this is the same thing that I do in my class for the master's degree. I basically start with, when we talk about the knowledge, first we need to know about what are the sources of knowledge, right? How you verify these sources are very important, at least for the legal researchers, and what extent you make a distinctions with the information and the knowledge on the same time. Right? So there's a famous, literature that we use in the legal science. It said what kinds of methods is applicable across what kinds of disciplines. So when we say in law, we go one step beyond the knowledge productions. We first try to see whether the sources from where you're generating the knowledge is authentic or not. For example, in law, we go more into the constitutions, we go more into the courts, we go more into the very confined authorities. So in that way, I'm more curious to know about how you validate yourself when you talk about this knowledge is very peculiar to this subject and it's very important that a student must know before they move into the second questions of which are for the resource courses, right? Second thing, when we say, as you were showing, inductive and deductive reasoning, in law we also apply abductive reasoning. So this is the third category of reasoning that we try to look into when we try to frame, when we engage with the resources into the legal matter. So how this abductive reasoning that's there in the resource domain can be considered as a sources of producing and disseminating the information. And last question, when we say about the knowledge, we also talk about the usability of those knowledge, right? We may have so many information, last one, this second. We may have so many knowledge, we may have so many information, but we're not using it anywhere. So how we extend this usability that's there in the purview of knowledge, disseminations, generations, or whatever you call it, would we literally use these things for myself.
हुन्छ one by one गरौँ न है
I'll address your first question then probably lead off. So thanks for the question. हामीले knowledge भनेर भन्दाखेरि we conceptualize knowledge not as a conclusive and uncontested. We conceptualize knowledge as an ongoing and evolving process, right? So how do we then think about students that are ready to move to the next step? We don't necessarily look at that as a very concrete sense of like you step by or next step as well. Instead, what we look at is in terms of engagement into knowledge production is the richness of the observations, right? तपाईले एक ठाउँ जस्तै उदाहरणको लागि, you might have driven this road for the last 20 years, maybe let's say just 5 years. हिँडिराख्दाखेरि you see the same building, you see the same perhaps road structure. अथवा हाइकिङमा जानुहोस्, maybe that's better. हाइकिङमा जानु भने रुख देख्नुहुन्छ के देख्नुहुन्छ, same thing. But the students as researchers, are they saying the same thing? Are they seeing the same thing? Or do they have a different kind of perspective and angle? Right? जस्तै मेरो आमाले एउटा कथा जहिले भन्नुहुन्थ्यो के एउटा जग्गाको बारे जहिले कुरा गर्नुहुन्छ. She would always tell me about that. What I, over the course of my own experience, मैले के सिकेँ भने why my mother is repeatedly telling me this story, the same thing. Film हेर्नु भने एउटै सुनिन्छ क्या. The more you focus, you see color, not in tinted and not exaggerated way, but you see layers of those complexities in her observation about that specific phenomena or jagga, right? So my intention then is to very seriously look at how rich these observations are. Are they repetition? Are they recycled? Or are there any new angles, new interpretation? Because in my own kind of philosophical positioning is, you always see different. You should have a different views, and that's where you constantly engage in knowledge production, right? Part of that conversation. So I'm going to take no more. What I'm trying to say is to look at that complexity, that richness. They repeat sorry, that's not like really deep meaning. But kids repeatedly same story भनिराख्नु भएको छ कि हैन नेपाल दुई ढुङ्गा तरुलको बीच हो भनेको छ कि but there's something else going on, right? Is about ढुङ्गा has been interpreted a different way, is the tarul has been interpreted a different way, and if that's the case, then how, why? So that richness is, I think, fundamental in terms of students' ability to engage in that observation.
Would anything be useful for you?
I can't hear.
Oh, sorry. Anything you wanted to add?
Oh no, not at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing we'd say is that, I mean, especially in social science, especially when we dig into very specialized topics, and say, sorry, Ali observe गरेको कुराको आधारमा अब हाम्रो संसार यस्तै हुन्छ भन्ने खोज्दाखेरि the way we achieve that testing and that engagement is by opening the space and getting as many people as possible into that conversation. You know, I mean, you know, it's we can in academia we can write and I love that kind of academic writing. I love that kind of intensely theoretical work. But I think one thing we really hope to see and want to see is that access to that process of knowledge production and knowledge making is wider than just people who can devote 10 years of their lives doing a PhD. And I think kind of opening the doors in that way and kind of working with the doors open really serves that problem of validation. I'm going to gloss over the abduction question really quickly just because it's super technical. The concept notes, the concept apps we do have a specific space for kind of metaphorical reasoning. In this place it's like this, so maybe in this place it's like this. It becomes sort of a hypothesis testing mechanism that we use abductive reasoning in that kind of space.
So do you teach only or you learn from students? So how do you co-produce the knowledge, right? Is there any role of the student, not only student, your object, your storyteller, the community people who don't know the jargon of the theory, right? Do you give the space for this stakeholder in knowledge group production, or you take a story, you just collect the story and you do their story and then the knowledge produced by you? How do you co-produce the knowledge? You produce only or you co-produce?
Do you mean us three as faculty or our students as well? Yeah. I think that's a very hard question, and I think we probably fail at it as much as we succeed, but it's certainly something we aspire to. I think one piece that is a major transition for a lot of the students who join our course is helping them to see themselves as the peers of the people we're reading. So we read all the classics. We read Durkheim, we read Weber, we read Marx, we read all these folks. But really trying to create spaces in classrooms where those voices are voices of peers rather than voices of somebody who has something to tell you is extraordinarily difficult. As to how we kind of bring voices from the field work we do into and kind of empowering those spaces and bringing them into kind of dialogue, I think that's something we certainly encourage our students to do. It's something that's tremendously important. I think kind of certainly in a lot of the writing that I do personally, I see myself as kind of identifying the theoretical work that the deaf people I work with are doing in profound and fundamental ways, and seeing the kind of the theories of language and the theories of sociality, the theories of communication that are kind of part of their everyday lives, and that are things that they're articulating. Maybe not in exactly the genres that I have to write in when I write a journal article, but who are themselves theorists of their own lives and theorists of the social dynamics around them, and have astonishingly astute observations to make about those things. That's certainly the kind of thing that I feel is the most valuable thing that I can write.
Muna, do you want to say something about it?
What's the question? I didn't clearly hear something about co-production of knowledge. What was that?
Right. In fact, this is also there.
Yes.
Is there a lag time?
It's not too bad. I don't think the lag, but it's probably the audio is not super great. We'll pull you here. I'll text the next question that comes in. I'll text it to you.
Yeah,
Sorry
if
about
it's
that.
possible.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I mean, in my own personal capacity, I've been trying to write for over 50 years now, right? And you learn things about your own writing every day, or every new piece of writing you try to do. But also in this institution, I ran an academic writing course for several years before the pandemic, disrupted our lives. And at least there are 6 or 7 people in this room whose writings I have engaged with. Some of them are mine over many years. There are two fundamental mysteries that I have not been able to really unpack, and Dhirendraji began to do this. One is unpacking the idea of hard work. So all of us in our own lives, we've been trying to do hard work for, some of us for 5 decades plus, some of us for 3 decades and so forth. And my own sense is, the people I have worked with in Martin Chautari, everyone has done hard work, every single one of them. But some people, over the course of a few years, become very efficient about doing hard work, and others don't. So do you guys have some kind of some ideas about why is it that some people learn the work very efficiently as hard workers and others don't? So that's one aspect. The other is related to a lot of things all three of you said, which is, I think of social science as a conversation. So, and that conversation gets converted into writing. And Peter talked about writing every day. And Munaji talked about providing feedback, either in the form of, in workshops or in other platforms. Now, people I've worked with for over almost like 2 decades now, I have realized that some people are extremely good at revising their own text when they get feedback from all kinds of people. So this is like, if you get 3 sets of peer reviews, give it to them, they disappear with those reviews and then come back after 2 weeks with a very finely revised text. But you turn them and ask them to provide fair reviews on other people's writings, and they provide extremely poor peer reviews. And there are people in this room who probably know who I am talking about. Their own intellectual training has been of that kind. So do you guys have any clues regarding why this happens? Where some people become extremely proficient at revising their own text, but providing poor peer reviews to others. And does it have any relationship to the kinds of hierarchies that Dhirendraji was talking about? Is there something related to social cultural worlds in which we live, or is this related to the kinds of everyday artists that Peter was emphasizing?
हुन्छ कोबाट सुरु
I
गरौँ
think the second question, Prakash, the second question is perfect for Muna. And so I think if we can start there, that's great.
Thank you, Pratyushi. I think the question of hard work, sorry, I was smiling throughout, but I completely agree with you, and a lot of our faculty meetings surround this question of, I mean, you could call it hard work, we could also call it grit, right? We call it perseverance, we call it showing up, whatever it is, right? Putting work in it every day. And yeah, it's quite fascinating, and sometimes I think we come off sounding a little bit like, oh, के हो आजकल त कसैले पनि hard work गर्न सक्दैन, like, you know, that kind of like negative kind of त्यस्तो खालको तर so yeah, so I think, as Peter was saying earlier, the beautiful thing that we have seen emerge in the last 4 years is that we don't want to say like, you know, who's a quote unquote successful student and who's a failure, whatever. I think failing is very important in that sense too. But the students who have just, as you mentioned, put in hard work and just showed up, has been able to sort of go through the course and sort of complete with very, very rich data and, you know, still unanswered questions and explorations and a capstone that actually is the beginning of a much larger journey for them, right? So that's been clear for sure. I don't have an answer, I think, to like how come some people are just so easy with, efficient with little hard work and others with not, but I think it also has to do with what we deem as hard work. I think a couple of years ago, I saw a tweet, not naming the person, but someone younger who said, oh my God, you gotta check out this archive. I put in 2 whole weeks of work in it. And my first thought was like, 2 weeks of work? You know, and so I don't know. So I think maybe it's arbitrary. And we also, as you said, sort of frame the work of social science, or any kind of, I believe, like nonfiction writing especially, as a conversation, as an ongoing conversation of hundreds of years old, right? Where we are interlocutors, we are also having conversations with people who have passed away and their work, through their work, and we are creating new conversations. You know, a student this semester, in the first semester, was saying that they had watched an episode of Henry Katha on 2 women and their love for one another. And they were saying that they wanted to read more essays about that particular episode and that non-meaning of that relationship that is done in a very subtle and beautiful way. And my response to them was like, well, you have to create the conversation. You have to write the, you know, essay that you would want to read. And sometimes that's also starting the conversation and then adding to an ongoing larger conversation about what is LGBTQI, well, you know, who gets to be that, who is not deemed that, what is love, etc., right? And so connected to that, the question of some people are good at revising their own text, but not that great at giving peer reviews. So I was also sort of smiling at this because yesterday I did the pure like lecture thing with my students where I was just like, this is horrible feedback letter, like, you know. And the way we did it was, I put it to them, I said, okay, spend 15 minutes looking through the feedback letters that you have received. Without sharing names, just share which feedback letters, which feedback sentences, phrases, paragraphs, whatever was most useful for you and why, and then which you were either confused about or didn't know what to do. And a lot of the times they said anything that was vague or anything that was like, I like this, but we don't know why, or even a feedback like "यो कस्तो खतरा छ" is actually a bad feedback, right? Because it's like कसरी खतरा छ, कसरी राम्रो छ, के हो, like you don't know, So they realize that a lot of feedback that's vague or that's just like I don't like, without the whys and the hows is obviously not as useful. And also feedback that's so hard to sort of put into quote unquote, this is their words, action. Like that's not actionable. But you feedback to dinu bhayo. Aba मैले के चाहिँ गर्नुपर्ने next 1-2 step, हैन? त्यो clear भएन भने चाहिँ गाह्रो हुँदो रहेछ भन्ने चाहिँ we had a very lovely discussion on holding a standard of both like care in a community, creating that community of readers and being accountable to that community. Because I really believe that people who are good at revising their own texts actually should be great at giving feedback, but maybe they're being stingy, I don't know, in your case that you have pointed out. Maybe they're feeling like they don't want to share that. I have no idea, right? Because I really believe that giving feedback is essential to also becoming a better writer, being able to give feedback, because you're reading, you're responding as a reader. And if you can respond as a reader, you can then imagine that audience for yourself as you write. And so, I'm sorry, it's a little bit all over the place, but I think these are two very fascinating things that you've brought up, and it's a constant conversation for us. And most of the time, it's about like, and the other thing we talk about in the workshop is we say, feedback दिँदा चाहिँ workshopमा there's a captive audience नि त 10 जना हुनुहुन्छ अब कहीँ पनि उनीहरूले पढ्नै पर्यो त्यो feedback दिनै पर्यो हैन. But like we can't always say that whatever we write in our lives necessarily will see the light of day or be published, right? So I often tell them, like, this is a gift. This community is a gift. And this time is a gift. Like, it's very unnatural in the real world, I think, where you can just say, you and get, like, great feedback, So we also train ourselves to, like, how can we spend this year building this community so that once this year is over with the course, we have built in those habits as writers and feedback givers and receivers and generous members of a community of writers and building that. So, yeah, a few answers. I think more questions than answers. Thank you.
Sure. One of the things, I think, Pratisha, that's the question that I think lifetime question for us too. One of the things that to add what Muna was saying is because of the things that we encounter with students, why do some of them learn well and some of them kind of struggle? Then I was briefly kind of touching that into socio-cultural condition, but also as like linking very fluidly in terms of the anxiety, trauma. But I think this like address like you're trying to, from day one, we're trying to build this, as Muna was saying, a community where you feel comfortable about saying what you think without fearing like somebody's judging me. अब जस्तै अंग्रेजी बोल्नु पर्ने छ क्लासमा जस्तो प्रेसर फिल हुन्छ कसैलाई तर अंग्रेजी बोल्नु पर्छ भन्ने छैन नेपालीमा बोल्दै पनि हुन्छ राइट तर कसैलाई without us creating any kind of that kind of pressure somehow they feel like I must speak in English अनि त्यसले एकछिनको already learning anxiety create गरिरहेको हुन्छ right. So our approach has been from day one to build this community where each and every one of them can freely share about their anxiety, their opinions, their just to build that trust. We know, we are not so successful at doing that yet, but that's our constant sort of like focus is यो 10 जना 7 जनाको ग्रुपलाई हामीले कसरी यस रिलेशनशिप बिल्ड अप गर्नुमा नर्चर गर्ने त्यो फोर्स गर्ने ताकि दे क्यान एक्चुअली टक हुन्छ नि डर बाहेक डर बिना अथवा मलाई चाहिँ मलाई कति नजान्ने भन्छ होला अथवा यो त म नजान्ने छ त्यसकारण म अलिक बोल्यो भने मिस्टेक गर्छु कि our constant sort of like effort has been to identify these kind of perceived structural inequalities among themselves, but we see them as equal peers, and to make them sort of like a horizontal sort of like a peers. बनाउने चाहिँ हाम्रो constant उद्देश्य हो, तर कहिले हुन्छ कहिले हुँदैन, and that has been just a struggle.
The only thing I'll add, Rotio, so you've been in this space a lot longer than I have. If you ever figure out how to help people be more efficient, let me know. Because I feel like I'm the least efficient writer I know. It takes me hours and hours to slog through a single page, and I don't know, maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I think she raised.
मैले किन अब मलाई कमेन्ट दिनु म मजाले रिभाइज गर्छु तर मलाई कसलाई कमेन्ट दिँदाखेरि चाहिँ मैले हैन उसको कपाल 50 वर्षको हैन अब कसरी सरस्वती रिटायर भएको अब पीएचडी डिग्री हैन अब विभिन्न त्यो हामी सोसाइटीमा राम्रो भन्ने कुराहरु सबै टोपी उस लगाएको छ अब म एउटा अलिकति लर्न गर्दै राखेको मान्छेले है कपाल देख्दा म मजाले सुधारेर थ्यांक यू सो मच तर त्यो जुन अब कल्चरली कुरा चाहिँ अब त्यो जुन चाहिँ नन ब्लाइन्डमा चाहिँ एउटा हामीले चाहिँ एउटा फियर छ नि मैले अब यस्तो धेरै समाजले मानेको यस्तो अनुभव मान्छेलाई कसरी फिडब्याक मेरो मनमै धेरै फिडब्याक आइरहेको छ यो मैले हिजो अस्ति नै 200 पेज जतिको फिडब्याकहरू गरेँ अनि मैले दिने मान्छे चाहिँ अब दिँदाखेरिको अलिकति दिने कि नदिने होइन अर्को मान्छे त एकदमै धेरै समाजले मानेको खुट्टै मान्छे हो मैले उसमा होइन पुरा सब एक्सपर्ट भनेर हायरै गरेको छ अब त्यो एक्सपर्टलाई गएर सानो मान्छेले तिमीले लेखेको यहाँनिर भएन यो भएन भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ जुन छ नि मैले भन्न सक्ने त्यो एउटा त्यो चाहिँ म कल्चरली मैले भन्न सक्ने आर्ट मैले जुटाउँदिनँ र त्यो समाजले हामीले च्यालेन्ज गर्दैन भन्यो यो ओपन के अरे नन ब्लाइन्डमा चाहिँ यो सबैभन्दा ठुलो कुरा चाहिँ यो कुराहरू चाहिँ मैले अघि भने अघिका त्यो तिनवटा चाहिँ एक्जेक्टिभले चाहिँ एकदमै धेरै हामीलाई चाहिँ त्यो दिन एकदम गाह्रो हुन्छ मेरो एकदम पर्सनल एक्सपिरियन्स चाहिँ त्यो जस्तो लाग्छ त्यो चिन्न सक्यो भने चाहिँ गर्न सक्छ
Can I just add उहाँले भन्नुभएको कुरामा I think that's really interesting. अघि प्रतिशीले पनि हायरार्किजको कुरा गर्नुभएको थियो सो अघि मैले भने जस्तो हामीले चाहिँ एटलिस्ट यो वर्कसपमा चाहिँ हामीले कसरी गर्छौँ भने वी ड्रामाटाइजिङ द रोल अफ द रिडर त्यति मात्र हामी एक्सपर्ट राइटरको हिसाबले फिडब्याक दिनु भन्दा पनि यो पढ्दाखेरि चाहिँ के हुन्छ सो हाम्रो वर्कसपमा चाहिँ वर्कसप सुरु गर्नुभन्दा अगाडि चाहिँ फर्स्ट सेक्सनमा चाहिँ के गर्छ भने यु नो पब्लिस राइटर्सहरू उहाँले पढिरहनु भएको किताबहरूको एक्सर्टहरू ल्याउनु भन्छ मैले क्लासमा होइन अब जस्तै अनि स्टुडेन्ट्सहरूले पढिरहेको एकदम मन पराएको राइटिङहरू ल्याउँछ नि हामीले त्यसलाई नै वर्कसप गर्छौँ क्या अब यो हुनसक्छ अरुन्धती रोयको पिस अथवा आई डोन्ट नो अरूको होइन मन परेको so that we are practicing giving feedback as writers as readers and not necessarily saying oh what was to publish the perfect and that also adds to I think that idea of the conversation then you're constant about our conversation it encourages that I think
हुन्छ तपाई त्यसपछि तपाई नै त्यसपछि एकैचोटि
विद्वान प्रस्तुता त्रयमा हार्दिक धन्यवाद
भूमिका नबाँधिकन ट्याक्क दिनु है
भूमिका बाँध्नै पर्ने बुद्धले भन्नुभएको अनुसार म बुद्धिज्मको विद्यार्थी थिएँ भनेर सुनेको ज्ञानको तह श्रोतामय ज्ञान चिन्तनमय ज्ञान भावनामय ज्ञान अनुभवमय ज्ञान त्यो तहको रूपमा उहाँले यसलाई स्रोतै पनि मान्न सक्छ अलग अलग अब अहिले हामीले समाज प्रोडक्टको रूपमा पायौँ समाज विज्ञान प्रोसेसको रूपमा पायौँ तर समुदायको आवाज हामीले नसुनेको हुँदाखेरि समाज र समाज विज्ञान प्रोडक्ट र प्रोसेस कस्तो छ हामी सबैलाई थाहा छ त्यसो भए अब हामीलाई चुनौती समुदायलाई या समुदायले भनेको कुरा चाहिँ कसरी बुझ्ने समुदाय नै मार्गदर्शन हो समाज विज्ञानको यसमा दुई मत छैन जसरी प्रकृति विज्ञानको मार्गदर्शन अरू भए जस्तै समुदाय र त्यो समुदायको सराउन्डिङलाई कसरी त्यसले मात्रै प्रडक्ट र प्रोसेसलाई चाहिँ प्राकृतिक र वैज्ञानिक बनाउन सक्ने होला यो विषयमा चाहिँ यहाँहरूले आगामी दिनमा चिन्तन गर्ने हो कि यो शुभकामना मात्रै हो है यहाँहरू बढी मेहनत गर्ने भयो भने यहाँहरूले केही फिडब्याक दिनुभयो भने हामी बोक्छौँ है न्याय क्षेत्रमा बोक्छौँ उहाँहरू सरै हुनुहुन्छ हेर्नुहोस् म कानुनको पनि विद्यार्थी तर भर्खरको है अनि राजनीतिमा बोक्छौँ हामी समाजमा बोक्छौँ शुभकामना
हुन्छ तपाईँकोले त्यसपछि हामी एउटा लिन्छौँ है
I have a short question. Throughout this session, things like, we should see social facts with new perspective, with rich observation, right? But there is something called subjective understanding, meaning that we see certain things, use some things in our own way, which is something jurists have also acknowledged. Jurists also acknowledge that, once we once we get exposed to something, we attach our own way. And so my question is, how to see with rich perspective, how to see with new perspective every time when we get exposed to the same thing. My question is actually specified to Dhirendra. So actually anybody can question, but this is something I actually always struggle. So how to see with that new perspective?
Thank you.
अरू कसैको एकजना हजुर
म प्रमिस पोखराबाट यो स्टुडेन्ट र राइटरमा एन्जाइटीमा हुनु केही पनि हुँदैन तर राम्रो टु बी अ गुड राइटर होइन हाउ क्यान यु म्यानेज द न्युज दिस स्ट्रेस
फेरि भन्नुहोस् त
ऐश्वर्यले एन्जाइटी इज सम अफ डिस्टर्बिङ त्यसको क्ल्यारिफिकेसन बुझेपछि र यो हामी एज अ स्टुडेन्ट राइटर होइन अब एज अ डिग्री केही न केही लेभलमा त एन्जाइटी सबैलाई हुन्छ तर यो एन्जाइटीलाई हामी राम्रो राइटर बन्नमा कसरी प्रयोग गर्छौँ कसरी गर्छौँ त्यो कन्फ्युजनमा छु म
थ्याङ्क यू
तपाईँ नै
तपाईँको प्रश्न थ्याङ्क यू so maybe I'm just very short answer. Nepal is one of the poorest country in the world. Is that a subjective experience or is it something else? So, how do we see things from a new perspective? Have a lot of things to do. But one thing today I can share, with my own experience is dekhirakeko kuro. I think we are so accustomed to see like exact things, how we've been taught to see, right? And so the things that we talked about unlearning earlier, like Munazi was talking about, is to really that idea of reflexivity allows you to see things from a new perspective, right? This isn't constant. And त्यही भएर कहिलेकहिले रिसर्च भनेको हामी रोमान्टिसाइज गर्छौँ. It's about love and passion, right? The moment you are so curious, so immersed deep into things that you really are curious to know, then you are seeing things a new way, right? So that requires a very, very deep kind of engagement, right? म अघि भन्दै थिएँ नि हामीले अहिले हिजो अस्तिसम्म पनि कोही रिपोर्ट पढ्यो भने दोस्रो जनआन्दोलनदेखि फल्ना सुरु भयो, right? But we never pause a second and think about why is this particularly important? जनआन्दोलन त भयो तर त्यहाँबाट सुरु हामीले किन गरे? What is this जनआन्दोलन is telling us, for example? Right? So that intense love towards your desire to know something eventually allows you to see things in a new perspective. There's no kind of, I don't think there's no formula, right? But that's constant engagement about, महिला इमोसनल हुन्छ भनेर भन्यो हैन त. And that's kind of social fact भएर बस्यो अरे उनीहरुलाई. Because we all internalize that as social fact. Wait a second. Is it wrong to be emotional then? Can I not cry? Is it crying is a good thing now? Is it supposed to, men are not supposed to cry? That's social fact. That's what we internalize. And we try to hide, for example, as men, in many ways, right? But is that a subjective experience? It's kind of like that's the intense immersed into your desire to learn something, I think should be an entry point to look at things in a deep perspective. But that's all I can say for now. Would you like to tackle that question? Or, so it's about anxiety.
Yeah.
And how can we take that as?
म पनि सरकै ब्याकग्राउन्ड जस्तोबाट आइरहेको हो म पनि डेली लेख्छु प्रयास गर्छु हप्तामा 2-3 दिन चाहिँ 1-2 घन्टा लेख्ने प्रयास चाहिँ गर्छु तर अब त्यो एन्जाइटी एकदम मलाई फिल भइरहेको हो मलाई छोयो त्यसले कि सायद एन्जाइटी नभएको मान्छे हुँदैन भएन मान्छे हुँदैन एक त हुनु पर्यो नि मान्छे अनि मलाई कसरी त्यो राम्रो गुड राइटर हुनको लागि हाउ क्यान वी युज दिस एन्जाइटी टु बी अ गुड राइटर हाउ क्यान वी युज
I want to pass this to Moon as well because she'll have something to say. But I think one thing that, and this isn't always easy, teaching about that, one thing I always try to communicate is that the struggles that my students are having, I mean, I'm having too. I get anxious writing. I mean, this is not something that you beat. You don't conquer this, you know? I certainly don't. Maybe others have. I don't know how. I think one thing that we really try to encourage people to do is that just allow yourself to write badly. I think oftentimes that's part of the block is it's like, I know like perfect who I know perfect that reflects badly on me. But first drafts are terrible. All first drafts are terrible. Dhirendra's read a lot of my first drafts, and they were terrible. I mean, that's part of the process, of allowing yourself to write badly, and to have a community that will see the good in that. Spaces like this that will say, I don't really know what's going on here. Yeah, people that's all interesting. Like to find those spaces for yourself, I think are really critical. And again, I mean, this is what we keep coming back to see this as a process rather than a product. If you're writing every day, you can't get that anxious about it because it's just that much stuff, And I think that's the thing that I struggle with too. I don't mean to say that we have solved this because it's something that I find very hard in my daily life as well. But when I have been able to be successful at it, it's by kind of taking that pressure off and just saying, your piece.
I think it's also related to what Dhiren you were saying earlier about bhaya, not like bhaya, sorry, fear. Ani मलाई चाहिँ के लाग्छ भने म स्कुलमा हुँदाखेरि जे लेखे पनि टिचरले चाहिँ रातो पेनले चाहिँ झर्काट कोर सबै स्पेलिङ रङ रस्व दीर्घ सबै रङ भएर चाहिँ अनि मलाई त्यो लेख्न नै डर लाग्ने किनभने लेख्यो भने त कारखुल गरिदिन्छ सो किन लेख्ने हैन अनि कहिलेकाहीँ के पनि हुन्थ्यो भने मैले आफै हाई स्कुल पनि पढाएको हो मैले अनि एउटा एपिसोडमा चाहिँ मैले एकजना स्टुडेन्टसँग काम गरिरहेको थिएँ अनि उनले चाहिँ म यो सेन्टेन्स लेख्छु भनेर यस्तै के ही वाज मच्योर हो कि त्यसै के उलाई लेख्न मन थियो ही वाज 16 years old अनि तर उलाई चाहिँ मच्योरको स्पेलिङ नआएर चाहिँ उले एकछिन सोच्यो अनि उले he was smart त्यस्तै के लेख्यो के हैन किनभने उलाई मच्योरको स्पेलिङ नआएर उले त्यो आर्ट नै गरेन बिकज इट्स स्केरी रङ हुन सो मैले तिमीले मच्योर भनेको सो मच्योर लेख त भन्दाखेरि उले MACHUR लेख्यो के अनि मैले ओके ग्रेट नाउ लेट्स मुभ अन टु नेक्स्ट सेन्टेन्स भने हैन सो आई थिंक त्यो लेभल्समा अब जस्तै आज हामीले अडियन्सको कुरा गर्यो तर हामी सुरुमा नै फर्स्ट लेख्न बस्दाखेरि नै ओहो मेरो अडियन्स सोच्यो भने चाहिँ अलिक डर लाग्दो नै हुन्छ हैन किनभने देन को हो मेरो अडियन्स उहाँले के भन्नुहुन्छ उहाँले त मलाई काटकुट पारेर खाइदिनुहुन्छ म के लेख्ने मलाई उहाँ त एक्सपर्ट हुनुहुन्छ म त उहाँको अगाडि के त्यो देन द एंजाइटी बिल्ड्स अप But I think the audience part comes a little bit later when we're trying to think, okay, let's turn this into, that's why Hamro workshop comes so much later, at the end of the year, not at the beginning. Beginning, you're just writing every day, writing, it's nonsense, no one's checking grammar. I don't teach grammar. I don't even know how to teach grammar. I mean, some of our students, I think I see RK there laughing because he's probably like, yeah, you didn't teach grammar. But yeah, so I think त्यो लेभलमा नि हुन्छ नि अर्को चाहिँ यसरी नै त्यो ड्राफ्टको कुरा गरेको अघि हामीले होइन and I think you are very familiar तपाईँले obviously तपाईँ लेखक हुनुहुन्छ so just एउटा छोटो कथा चाहिँ मेरो एकजना साथीले चाहिँ अमेरिकन पोएट activist Audre Lorde and writer Audre Lorde को बारेमा चाहिँ अनुसन्धान गरिरहनु भएको थियो अनि Audre Lorde को चाहिँ धेरै आर्काइभ्सहरु रहेछ हैन कता जर्मनीमा अमेरिका अन्त अनि उहाँले चाहिँ एउटा एटलान्टामा चाहिँ उहाँको आर्काइभ खोलेर हेर्दाखेरि चाहिँ Audre Lorde को पुरै नोटबुकहरु भेटाएर के अनि उहाँले चाहिँ सुरुमा लेख्दाखेरि चाहिँ एकदमै त्यो रिसको झोकमा यस्तो लेख्नु हुँदै थियो कि त्यो कागज पनि च्यातेको हैन अनि शब्द पनि यत्रो ठुलो ठुलो लाइक जय नसोचिकन लेखेको हैन अनि त्यो लेख्यो पहिला सबै निकाल्यो अनि त्यसपछि अर्को ड्राफ्ट त्यही इमोसन लाइक इट केम फ्रम अ भेरी स्ट्रङ प्लेस फर हर हैन स्ट्रङ इमोसन्स अनि त्यसलाई अलिकता हुँदैन एडिट अब अलिकता शान्त त्यसलाई छेउमा राख्ने 2 हप्तापछि फेरि त्यसलाई हेरेर ओके अब यसलाई भन्नुपर्दा मैले के गर्नुपर्छ अलिकता मेरो अडियन्सले मलाई रिसिभ गरोस् किनभने एङ्ग्री ऱ्यान्टमा त धेरैलाई पढ्नु मन लाग्दैन नि त रिसेप्टिभ हुँदैन नि हैन सो उहाँले चाहिँ बिस्तारै त्यसलाई ढाल्दै 8 ड्राफ्ट्स पछि चाहिँ फाइनली इट विल बी लाइक 8 or 10 I don't know how many drafts पछि चाहिँ it's an essay in a collection you know so I think त्यो सुरुमा नै अडियन्स सोच्यो भने त त्यो भन्दा ठुलो भयानक I don't know एकदम गाह्रो
अब एक राउन्ड मात्रै गरौँ एक राउन्डमा चाहिँ नयाँ चाहिँ कोही छैन भने त्यस्तै त्यसपछि हामी त्यसपछि तपाईँ तपाईँ त्यसपछि तपाईँ अन्त्य गरौँ
I was wondering each cohort of students are with you for how long? The reason I asked this question is after people have gone through the daily habit of writing, as Peter described, at some point they need to be able to self-edit. And what I mean by that is they can write all kinds of text, the kinds of text that you described to us. But at some point, if they need to produce what Munaji was talking about, public-facing text, the ability to choose from what you've written in the past to create a new text is essential. And my point is, in having worked with people here, in the brute way of having never learned how to teach writing to others, but to be able to tell them how you could revise by looking at concrete text, not in the abstract. My sense is 1 year is simply not enough time for people to learn this. So how do you deal with this?
उहाँको पनि है
My question is here, we are talking about the knowledge, imparting of knowledge, or knowledge production. My concern here is that if we are limited to the certain kind of confinement of the knowledge, then normally it is assumed that in the materialistic world, people will be very self-centered. At any cost, it is said that knowledge education is a continuous process. They will get some time to correct themselves, and it is often said that if you want to cross the limitation of that knowledge means normally it's we are a bit self-centered, whatever it is. So if we are imparting the same kind of information using different kind of methodology, it is said that it depends upon the time and space also. Then is it possible to liberate them, or just we are revolving in the same circle? I mean, my question is, do we need to cross the limitation? I mean, I may be trying to linking it with a bit abstract view also. So can you impart those things also? It may be given different names like spiritualism, or maybe abstract things which cannot be measured. But it has been said that when the materialistic world ends and the spiritualism starts. So if you are imparting, it is said, I have found somewhere one quotation like education is for living. I mean to say that knowledge is for living, and wisdom is is for the complete life. So we can give the entire package of the life, or just we are revolving in the certain circle only.
अब यो नै लास्ट गरौँ त्यसपछि तपाईँ कन्क्लुडिङ तपाईँको केही थप भन्नुहुन्छ भने त्यसरी
Yeah, I mean, I think to start, absolutely a year is not enough. I mean, there's no question. The first semester of the program is very kind of liberal arts seminar style of reading texts and focused in that way, and then the second semester is very project focused. But it's absolutely true. We do find that students kind of get sometimes very stuck there, where that process of self-editing and self-editing towards text, but also self-editing in terms of just providing the structures and spaces to show up. You know, little things like just finding ways to ensure that you're writing constantly is something that many of our students have really struggled with. And I mean, you know, before we started this program, we had a lot of people telling us why it wouldn't work, and a lot of people saying, oh, you know, and honestly, a lot of very like colonialist, racist tropes that I'm sure all of you have heard 1,000 times of lack of critical thinking, blah, blah, blah. That has never been a limitation for us. I don't think we have ever encountered that as a problem. What we do encounter time and again, however, is just people being able to make the time for this work. And to say this is something, there's no shortcuts here. You can't just like, you can't just kind of snap your fingers and say something clever. I mean, that's not what social science research is about. It's really a very non-magical slog. It's a slow process of digging through huge amounts and immersing yourself in whether that's a historical archive or an ethnographic field site or a quantitative data set, whatever it is. It's that just being there every single day. And I think when people are doing that, sometimes they absolutely do struggle, and sometimes they're kind of coming at it in ways that maybe don't feel, to me at least, all that productive. But it's felt like kind of as a community, we've always had ways to get past that. When people just say, hey, like, I don't know what to say to that. I kind of forbid the word like busy in my classes because everybody's busy and it's just, there's nothing to say to it. There's nothing to do about it. And you know, we advertise our program as a full-time program, but people really struggle with that concept. It's that idea of kind of dedicating oneself to social science, not just as a course that you'll get a certificate from, but really as a lifestyle and an identity and a way of engaging the world. Is that far and away has been the hardest part. It's not any of the critical thinking or whatever that kind of quasi-racist nonsense, not even quasi-racist, full-on racist nonsense is. That has never been a challenge, but and I certainly don't think we're trying to claim that every student who has walked through our doors has been successful in terms of, again, kind of follow on what Muna was saying. We don't want to define that too narrowly, but students do get lost and they disappear for, we had a defense from a student who completed the course 3 years ago, you know, just, and that was really satisfying, but sometimes students do get lost, but it's immensely satisfying to see the people who had thought that they didn't have anything important to say or anything interesting to say come up with, you know, world quality, top-notch social science arguments on this subject. I don't have any solutions to it though, but it's about spaces like this. It's about spaces that we're trying to create and kind of building that continuity for what happens after your course as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to structurally, I mean, we have different, as I'm sure many institutes today have different chat groups, etc. And we have one of our members who've ever been through Open Institute. There's over 60 of us, and there's a group, and it's quite an active group. And also, I mean, this last semester, Peter also opened up his class to be an ongoing class, ethnographic theory, and so what that happens, I mean, and maybe Peter can talk more about it, but students who had already, as you were saying, Pratishu, like passed out or left, were coming back and like sharing their concept notes, sharing their memos, and trying to turn it into concept, etc., and continuously working with students who are today in the first semester or second semester. And so that kind of access to us, we ensure that it's still open. We have close relationships with students who were with us 3 years ago, still come to us and share, and they themselves have that. So we also have a fellows program, which slowly we're trying to build it into that part of exactly what you're saying, like what happens after, like beyond that 1 year, because clearly 1 year is not enough.
केही छ लास्टमा छैन मैले
Yeah, nothing. I think we just wanted to thank you to you all, and especially Martin Chautari, and for your very, very interesting questions. And we continue to grapple with this as we move forward, and I hope to have you more deeper conversation in the days to come, right? So thank you very much.
हुन्छ आजको छलफल यही अन्त्य गरौँ पिटरजी हाम्रो धीरेन्द्रजी र मुनाजीलाई चाहिँ धन्यवाद तपाईहरुलाई पनि विशेष धन्यवाद हाम्रो अर्को कार्यक्रम पर्सि हुँदैछ तपाईको इच्छा समय छ भने आउन सक्नुहुन्छ आजको छलफल यही अन्त्य धन्यवाद